The palace walls have heard everything, but this time the silence cracked and the tremor reached all the way to the throne, because whispers say King Charles III has finally stopped pretending he doesn't see the storm swirling around his youngest son and the woman who once looked like thee. Monarchy's modern miracle. What happened behind closed doors, the kind of secret sealed tighter than royal vaults, is now leaking out in fragments so sharp they don't just cut reputations, they redraw legacies. And if the murmurs racing through court circles are even half true, this isn't just family drama. This is a quiet implosion dressed in designer calm, a love story turned chess match, and a prince who may have realized too late that the game was never about romance, it was about control. For years, the public saw curated smiles, hand-holding photo ops, and speeches about healing, growth, and freedom. But behind the gates of their mansion in Montecito, insiders whisper the temperature had dropped long before anyone admitted the fairy tale was frosting over. The laughter that once echoed through early interviews reportedly faded into long silences, separate schedules, separate rooms, separate emotional climates. The kind of distance that doesn't explode, it erodes. People close to the situation claim Meghan Markle didn't scream, didn't throw plates, didn't stage dramatic confrontations. That's not her style, they say. Instead, she allegedly did something colder and far more strategic. She started shaping the story before the ending arrived. Soft concerns shared with friends. Gentle hints that something wasn't right with Prince Harry, that he was struggling, that he had changed, that the spark had dimmed not because of her, but because he was unraveling under pressure he couldn't handle. And just like that, a narrative began to breathe. Then came the leak that made seasoned royal watchers blink twice. A report from Radar Online didn't just speculate about stress or distance, it zoomed in on deeply personal medical details, hair loss treatments, side effects, mood shifts, the kind of private information that doesn't wander into tabloids by accident. Suddenly, the internet wasn't debating constitutional roles or charity work, it was laughing at a prince's bathroom cabinet. It was humiliating, intimate, surgical. Those close to Harry said that moment changed him, not because of vanity, but because of betrayal. Medical details aren't pillow talk, they're trust deposits. And when something that private becomes global punchline material, you don't just feel exposed. You start wondering who opened the door. From there, the pattern, if sources are to be believed, didn't look random. It looked paced, calibrated, like breadcrumbs leading the public toward one conclusion, a devoted wife quietly suffering beside a man quietly falling apart. She appeared composed, purposeful, evolving. He looked tired, tense, adrift. Image versus instability, poise versus pressure. But the most unsettling whispers aren't about headlines, they're about footage. Multiple insiders claim Meghan allegedly kept a private archive, not of texts or emails, but videos. Moments Harry never imagined would exist outside memory. Clips from nights he'd rather forget. Parties where he looked less like a prince and more like a man spiraling. Vulnerable scenes recorded during low points when the world believed he was healing. Nothing confirmed, everything denied publicly. But the rumor alone was enough to rattle palace nerves, because the power dynamic shifts when one person holds receipts the other can't erase. Those who've heard about these alleged clips say they were never used openly, never waved like a threat. That's what makes it colder. Instead, they were supposedly shown quietly to select confidants. A raised eyebrow here. A subtle you have no idea what I've seen there. Not blackmail in the movie sense. More like psychological gravity. The silent understanding that if things turned ugly, history could be rewritten in seconds. By the time the medication story hit the press, people close to the prince say he already felt cornered. Every disagreement at home carried an invisible shadow. What else could surface? What else might already be documented? Privacy, once freely given, allegedly felt like ammunition stored somewhere he couldn't reach. Then came the whispers that shook even veteran royal observers. The surrogacy rumors. No proof, no documents, just hushed claims that Meghan may not have carried one or both pregnancies herself. In most families, that would be a personal medical choice. In royal lineage, it's constitutional dynamite. Bloodlines aren't gossip in that world, they're legal architecture. Even the suggestion was enough to make palace traditionalists stiffen. Supporters call the rumors cruel. Critics call them suspicious. The palace calls them unworthy of comment. But for Harry, insiders say the mere existence of those whispers was destabilizing. A man who walked away from royal rigidity to build a different life, suddenly facing doubts not from courtiers but from tabloids and strangers dissecting his children's origins like a courtroom debate. Through it all, Meghan appeared focused, forward-moving, rebranding with calm precision. New projects, new appearances, new phases. While Harry, according to those who claim to know, looked increasingly like a man watching his own narrative slip out of his hands. The soldier who fought tabloids now allegedly losing a war of perception inside his own home. And where does King Charles enter this storm? Palace insiders suggest the king had stayed publicly neutral for years, determined not to escalate family fractures. But recent private conversations, according to whispers threading through aristocratic circles, have been less restrained. Not explosive, not condemning, just weary. A father watching his son bleed reputation while refusing the shield tradition once offered. A monarch realizing modern love stories can't be managed with ancient rules. Those close to the crown say Charles understands image warfare better than anyone alive. He survived it. And if he's truly breaking silence behind the scenes, it may not be to attack Meghan, it may be to quietly prepare for fallout that could splash across the institution itself. Because this isn't just a marriage collapse anymore. It's a narrative arms race. Whoever tells the story first owns the memory. Whoever holds the evidence holds the future. And in this version of events, Meghan isn't portrayed as a woman abandoned, she's depicted as a strategist who never intended to lose. Harry, meanwhile, looks less like a rebel prince and more like collateral damage in a battle he didn't realize had battle plans. And if the king is finally speaking, even in whispers, it means the palace no longer believes this storm will pass on its own. If the first cracks were whispers, the second phase felt like tremors under polished marble, subtle to the public, seismic to the people living inside it. Because once trust fractures at that level, every glance becomes a question and every quiet moment feels recorded, archived, saved for a future argument that hasn't happened yet. Those who claim insight into the situation say Harry didn't wake up one day and decide everything was broken. It was slower than that, a growing sense that conversations were being rerouted, that disagreements didn't end, they were stored, that apologies didn't heal, they documented guilt. Imagine trying to fix a relationship while suspecting the worst versions of yourself might someday be presented as evidence. Friends allegedly noticed he became more cautious in his own home, choosing words carefully, avoiding emotional outbursts, pulling inward, not because he stopped caring, but because he feared caring the wrong way. The irony is brutal. A man who fled palace life to escape surveillance allegedly ending up in a space where emotional surveillance felt even closer. Meanwhile, Meghan's public presence reportedly sharpened, not louder, clearer. Each appearance, each project, each carefully framed message seemed to position her as independent, resilient, forward-looking. The optics told a story of evolution, growth, a woman stepping into her power. And maybe that's exactly what she was doing. But inside the marriage, sources claim that same evolution translated into emotional distance Harry didn't know how to bridge. Insiders whisper that arguments weren't explosive, they were strategic. Less shouting, more silence. Less chaos, more calculation. The kind of tension where the loudest thing in the room is what isn't being said. And in that silence, Harry reportedly began to feel something unfamiliar and terrifying, replaceable. Because here's the part people don't talk about: when fairy tales unravel, image can outpace intimacy. One partner becomes a brand in motion while the other is still trying to be a person in pain. And if you can't keep up with the brand, you start to feel like baggage slowing the launch. Some palace-adjacent figures suggest that's when King Charles' concerns shifted from emotional to institutional, not because he suddenly took sides, but because the pattern looked familiar. He had lived through public marital collapse under a global microscope. He knew how quickly private fractures become public verdicts. And if Harry's story was being written elsewhere without palace influence, the monarchy wouldn't just be watching a family drama, it would be watching its narrative authority slip away. The king, according to murmurs in aristocratic circles, is less interested in blame than in containment. Because once personal allegations start overlapping with royal identity, the consequences stop being tabloid level and start brushing against constitutional symbolism. Even if every rumor is false, the repetition alone carves damage into public perception. Back in California, though, perception wasn't theory, it was daily reality. Sources claim Harry began leaning heavily on a smaller, tighter circle, fewer social appearances, Fewer spontaneous moments. A man once known for impulsive warmth allegedly becoming guarded, analytical, tired. Not broken, not defeated, just worn thin by emotional chess he didn't know he was playing. And Meghan? Those same whispers describe someone already mentally 3 steps ahead. Not cruel, not villainous in some cartoonish way, just pragmatic to a degree that felt ruthless to the person on the other side of it. In this telling, love didn't explode, it expired. And once expired, it became negotiation. Who gets what? Who says what? Who looks like what when the dust settles? Because Martin breakups at that level aren't just heartbreak, they're reputation strategy. And if there truly were private recordings, private messages, private vulnerabilities stored somewhere, then the balance of power would never feel equal again. Even if nothing was ever released, the possibility alone would shape behavior. That's the quiet terror insiders hint at not scandal, but anticipation of scandal. There's also talk that Harry struggled with the realization that walking away from royal protection didn't just remove pressure, it removed insulation. Inside the palace, crises are managed by teams trained to absorb impact. Outside it, every hit lands directly. And if your partner is media savvy, perception aware, and unafraid of public reinvention, you can feel outmatched in a battle you never meant to fight. Still, it would be too simple to paint one as mastermind and the other as victim. Even sympathetic voices admit Harry brought his own wounds into the marriage, grief, distrust of institutions, unresolved trauma. Love can soften those things, but it can't erase them. And when two people both carry heavy histories, sometimes the relationship becomes less a refuge and more an echo chamber. What makes this story feel different, insiders say, is the sense that the ending wasn't chaotic, it was phased, step by step, image shift by image shift, emotional disengagement followed by narrative repositioning. By the time the public began seriously questioning the stability of the marriage, those inside it allegedly knew the emotional divorce had already happened. And hovering over all of it is King Charles, a monarch in the strange position of being both father and symbol. He can comfort privately, but every public move has political weight. If he defends too loudly, he looks partial. If he stays silent, he looks cold. So he does what seasoned royals do best. He watches, he waits, and he prepares for outcomes he hopes won't arrive. Because if this truly ends in a formal split, the aftermath won't just be about two people. It will reopen debates about monarchy, modernity, race, media cruelty, privilege, victimhood, and truth itself. Each side will have supporters convinced they're defending justice. Each headline will be treated like evidence in a global trial of public opinion. And somewhere in the middle of that storm will be Harry, the prince who once believed love was an exit from history, now learning that history has a long memory and love, under enough pressure, can turn into leverage. Whether the rumors are exaggerated, distorted, or painfully accurate, one thing feels undeniable to those watching closely. This wasn't a fairy tale that failed overnight. It was a slow erosion hidden behind perfect lighting, filtered smiles, and carefully chosen words. And if the king is indeed finally acknowledging the depth of the fracture, even in private tones, it signals that the palace no longer expects reconciliation, only impact control. Because when love stories end quietly at that altitude, the silence is never empty. It's loaded.